The lanterns in the Whitford estate glowed like tiny suns, burning bright enough to fool the world into believing everything was perfect. Laughter floated through the wide halls, champagne glasses clinked, and a string quartet played its brittle, cheerful music. To everyone present, it was a celebration. Eleanor Whitford, the rancher's refined daughter, was to marry the wealthiest banker in the territory. To Eleanor, it felt like a funeral. Her corset bit into her ribs as she stood beside her father, smiling on command while guests offered congratulations she never asked for. Her fiancé, Silas Crowley, hovered nearby, his pale eyes always watching, always calculating. He squeezed her arm every time she shifted her weight, a silent reminder that she belonged to him now. It didn't matter that he was old enough to be her father. It didn't matter that she had told her father she didn't want this. Money sealed deals faster than love ever could. Smile wider, her father whispered through clenched teeth as another guest approached. People can see your nerves. People could also see Silas's iron grip on her arm, but nobody said a word. Eleanor had known for months she was running out of choices. But as the celebration thundered around her, something inside her chest cracked open, something that screamed louder than her fear. Tonight was the engagement party. Tomorrow was the wedding. After that, her life might never again belong to her. So she decided to make a choice they couldn't control. As the music swelled, Eleanor stepped back from her father, pretending to faint. A few women gasped, skirts rustling as they rushed to help her. Silas leaned down, annoyed rather than concerned. "Get up," he whispered harshly. "You're embarrassing me." That was all she needed to hear. Before anyone could stop her, Eleanor bolted toward the back of the house. She ran through corridors she had memorized as a child. Skirts gathered in her fists, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She slipped through the kitchen, ignored the startled cook, and burst into the night air. The moon hung low, swollen and bright, illuminating the corral where her old mare, Willow, stood tied. "Just one more favor," Eleanor whispered as she mounted without a saddle. Willow responded with a soft snort, as if she understood. Eleanor kicked off her shoes, urging the mare forward. Hooves struck dirt, then gravel, then open prairie. Each stride took her farther from the life she did not want. The wind tore through her hair, lifting the heavy curls pinned hours ago. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she could breathe. But freedom came with a bitter price. No supplies, no water, and only the dress on her back. She rode until midnight, until Willow began to stumble with exhaustion. The poor mare had given her everything, almost too much. Eleanor slowed her to a stop near a cluster of mesquite trees. She slid off and pressed her forehead to the mare's warm neck. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." Her legs shook as she helped Willow settle under the shade. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew she couldn't go back. Her breath hitched as she sank to her knees. The night felt enormous, swallowing her fear and loneliness whole. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the cold seeped quickly through her thin dress. She hugged herself, trying to stay warm. "What now?" she murmured. "Where do I go?" But the desert didn't answer. And hours passed. Willow finally lay down, too tired to continue. Eleanor's vision blurred. Her fingers numbed. She curled beside the mare, desperately trying to share warmth with the only friend she had left. Just before dawn, when her eyelids felt too heavy to lift, she heard something HOOCHATS. Not hers, not Silas's men, slower, steadier, approaching with caution. Eleanor forced her eyes open. A tall figure on a dark horse emerged from the horizon, the rising sun framing him like a silhouette carved from the sky. He rode closer, his posture calm, his eyes sharp even from a distance. A stranger. a cowboy. A ranch hand, judging by his worn clothes. His gaze landed on her pale, shivering, alone beside a dying horse. "Ma'am?" He called gently. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor swallowed hard. This was either salvation or the beginning of another danger she didn't yet understand. The stranger slid down from his horse with a quiet grace, boots landing softly on the sand. In the growing light, Eleanor saw him clearly for the first time. He was young, no more than a few years older than she, tall and broad-shouldered, with a sun-tanned neck and strong hands that looked like they had worked hard their whole life. But it was his eyes that struck her most, an unreadable storm blue, sharp yet gentle. Carrying a depth that made her chest tighten, he approached slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might scare her away. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low and warm. "You look near frozen." Eleanor tried to speak, but her throat was too dry from the cold night. The cowboy noticed immediately. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a canteen, and held it toward her, careful not to come too close. She hesitated. In her world, men grabbed, demanded, controlled. But this man simply waited, letting her choose. Finally, her trembling fingers reached out. "Thank you," she whispered. The water hit her tongue like a blessing. She drank slowly, aware that he was watching her with concern rather than suspicion. He knelt beside Willow, checking the mare with experienced hands. "She ran too hard," he murmured. "Poor girl's exhausted, but she live." Relief hit Eleanor so suddenly she almost collapsed. She hadn't realized how much guilt she carried about pushing her horse too far. The cowboy stood and dusted off his jeans. "My cabin ain't far. I could take you both there. Warm food, fire, a place to rest." The offer was simple, kind, too kind. Eleanor's pulse quickened with fear. "Are you alone?" she asked quietly. "Always am," he replied. "Name's Caleb Rowe. I work as a ranch hand about 5 miles north, but I live off the property." Caleb. The name suited him, strong, honest, unpolished. "Why help me?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyes softened. "Because you look like you need help, ma'am. And because my mother raised me to never leave someone hurting on the roadside." No man had ever spoken to her with such plain decency. No threats. No clever manipulation. Just decency. But she still couldn't shake the tremor in her body. Caleb noticed. "If I'm making you nervous, I can keep my distance. You can ride my horse and I'll walk beside you. Whatever makes you feel safe." Safe. It had been so long since she felt that word. She swallowed hard. I would appreciate that." Caleb didn't smile or smirk or puff out his chest like the men she grew up among. He simply nodded, steady as the earth beneath them, and began preparing his horse. With surprising gentleness, he lifted Eleanor onto the saddle. She winced at the soreness in her limbs. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head too quickly. A shadow flickered in his eyes, but he didn't pry. Willow followed behind them slowly, tied with a loose lead rope. Caleb walked beside Eleanor the entire way, his stride patient, his voice quiet when he spoke at all. "You don't have to tell me nothin'," he said. "But if you need to talk, you can." Eleanor looked away. The vast prairie stretched in every direction, painted gold by the morning sun. For the first time in months, the world felt wide enough to hold her uncertainty. As they neared a cluster of cottonwoods, Caleb pointed ahead. "There, my place." A small cabin sat nestled against the trees, smoke curling from the chimney. It wasn't much, just a single-room structure, weathered but sturdy, with a horse pen nearby. But something about it felt honest, safe, human. Caleb slowed as they reached the porch. "I'll go in first and light the stove. You can take your time coming inside." He kept his word. He moved quietly, giving her space to breathe. Through the open door, she saw him pull off his coat, stoke the fire. and set a kettle of water to heat. When she finally stepped inside, shivering, he turned and froze. Eleanor hadn't meant to look so fragile. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled from the wind, her cheeks pale. She felt exposed, breakable. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you're safe now. I promise." She nodded, but her vision blurred. Her throat tightened. I'm sorry," she whispered as tears finally fell. "I didn't mean to fall apart." Caleb stepped closer, but not too close. His voice was a whisper of its own. "You ain't fallen apart," he murmured. "You're tired. Anyone can see that." Eleanor wiped her cheeks, embarrassed. "Please, be gentle." The words slipped out without thinking. Caleb's face flushed instantly, a boyish pink creeping up his neck and ears. He looked away, flustered. "I would never be anything else," he said quietly. For the first time since running away, Eleanor believed it. Caleb worked around the cabin with quiet efficiency, moving with a gentleness that surprised Eleanor every time she looked up. He set a blanket across the back of a chair near the fire and slid a tin mug toward her. "It's just hot water with honey," he said. "Good for shock." Shock. She hadn't thought of herself as shocked, but her hands trembled as she wrapped them around the mug. The heat seeped into her fingers, slowly thawing the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Caleb sat on the opposite side of the small table, elbows resting loosely on his knees. He didn't interrogate her. He didn't even stare. He just existed with her in the quiet, letting her breathe. After so many months of being watched, judged, controlled, the silence felt like a kind of mercy. Eleanor lifted the mug to her lips. Her voice came out hoarse and small. "Thank you for everything. You saved me." Caleb shook his head. "Just did what anyone decent would have done." But she knew that wasn't true. There weren't many decent men left in her world. She stared into the rising steam, unwilling or perhaps unable to say more. Telling the truth meant reliving it. Reliving meant hurting again. Caleb noticed her hesitation. He reached behind him slowly, grabbed his coat, and draped it across her shoulders without letting his hands linger. "I didn't mean to let you get cold," he murmured. She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry to be so much trouble." He frowned. "You ain't trouble. Not even close." A strange feeling tugged at her chest. Kindness had become so unfamiliar it almost felt like pain. Minutes passed, the fire crackled, and Eleanor finally drew in a breath steady enough to speak. "I ran away," she said. Caleb didn't flinch. He only nodded once, encouraging. "I ran from my engagement party. My wedding was supposed to be this morning." Caleb's brows drew together. "You left a wedding? Why?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around the mug. Here it was, the moment she had been dreading. The moment that would decide whether this stranger would turn cold like all the rest. "Because Silas Crowley," she whispered, her breath catching, "is not a good man." Caleb waited. Not pushing, not prying, just waiting. Eleanor stared at the mug, her voice cracking. "He treats people like property. He talks to me like I'm something he bought, not someone he's supposed to care for." A shadow passed through Caleb's eyes, but he remained quiet. "My father arranged the marriage," she continued. "Crowley promised him investments, land deals. The kind of things a man like my father values more than a daughter's happiness." Her throat tightened again. "I told him I didn't want it. Many times. He didn't listen." Caleb's jaw clenched subtly, but he kept his voice steady. "Did this Crowley hurt you?" Eleanor's breath hitched. She thought of the bruises hidden under her sleeves. The way Silas's fingers dug into her arm when she didn't smile quickly enough. The way he whispered threats disguised as promises. The way he claimed she would learn to obey. She looked away. "He hasn't hurt me in ways that leave scars someone like you could see." Her voice dropped. But yes, he hurt me. For a long moment, Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. Then he exhaled slowly, like he was trying to release the tension without frightening her. I'm real sorry, he said softly. No woman deserves that. His words weren't dramatic. They weren't sweeping. But they were steady and honest, two things Eleanor had lived without for far too long. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. My father would send men after me. I know he will. He cares more about Crowley's money than my freedom. Caleb leaned forward slightly. Did anyone see you leave? I pretended to faint, then ran, she said. I don't know when they'll realize I'm gone. Caleb thought for a moment, his gaze lowering to the table. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm but firm. Then we need to keep you safe until they give up searching. We? Eleanor echoed. Caleb blinked as if surprised she questioned it. You're not alone anymore, ma'am. Not while you're under my roof. Her eyes burned again, not from fear, but from something warmer she wasn't ready to name. But you don't even know me, she whispered. Don't need to, he replied. You're scared, and you didn't deserve what you went through. That's enough. Her breath wavered. Aren't you worried I'll bring trouble to your doorstep? He shrugged gently. Trouble finds every man sooner or later. I'd rather face mine knowing. I helped somebody who needed it. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that nobody had ever chosen to stand beside her without expecting something in return. Caleb pushed a bowl of warm stew toward her. Eat, rest. When you're ready, you can tell me the rest or not at all. Your choice. Her choice. How long had it been since she'd been given one? Eleanor looked at the man across the table, the stranger who treated her like a human being, and she felt something she hadn't felt since. Childhood. Hope. The morning sun spilled through the fell cabin's small windows, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden floor. Eleanor woke to the scent of fresh hay, horses outside, and something she had almost forgotten, the earthy, comforting smell of life lived simply. For the first time in months, she didn't hear the music of a forced celebration or the clipped orders of a controlling fiancé. Instead, she heard calm, quiet, safety. Caleb had been up before dawn, tending to the horses, feeding them, and repairing a broken fence. He didn't announce his presence, but Eleanor knew by the faint sound of footsteps and soft humming that he was moving about. When she finally pushed the blanket off her shoulders, she felt lighter than she had in years. She dressed quickly in the plain, slightly torn gown she had worn the night before, careful not to look like a runaway. But for once, appearances didn't matter. Nobody here cared about appearances. Nobody was judging her. Caleb stepped inside just as she stepped out onto the porch. The sun hit his face, making his storm-blue eyes appear almost silver. He smiled small, hesitant, but warm, and carried 2 cups of steaming coffee. Morning, he said simply. Hope you slept all right. I did, Eleanor admitted. Thank you. He handed her a cup, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond them, dotted with wildflowers and low scrub. A pair of hawks circled lazily above. Eleanor had never seen the world like this, not without walls, not without restrictions, not without expectations. Today, Caleb said, we start slow. Horses need feedin', fences need mendin'. You can help or just watch. Up to you. She hesitated. The thought of manual work made her stiff with uncertainty. But then she looked at him steady, patient, no judgment in his eyes, and felt a spark of courage. I'll help, she said. The rest of the morning passed in a rhythm Eleanor had never known. She fed the horses, brushed their coats, and even helped mend the broken fence under Caleb's guidance. He never rushed her, never spoke in impatience. Every time she faltered, he was there, offering a hand, a smile. or a quiet word of encouragement. By midday, sweat dotted her forehead, and her hands were scratched and calloused, but she had never felt more alive. The freedom of choice, the feeling of working alongside someone who treated her as an equal rather than property, made her chest ache with a strange, unfamiliar joy. During lunch, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh milk, Caleb told her about his life, how he had grown up on the prairie, learning to care for the ranch from his father, how he loved the land, the animals, and the quiet moments of life away from towns and their endless gossip. Eleanor listened, fascinated. He spoke without arrogance, without demanding admiration, and she realized she had never known a man who could be so strong and gentle at the same time. "You never ask for much," she said finally, curiosity slipping into her voice. "I've learned not to," he replied, eyes glinting with humor. "But some things are worth trying for." Eleanor's cheeks warmed and she looked away, pretending to nibble at her bread. She felt an odd flutter in her chest, something unfamiliar yet comforting. She realized that this stranger, this Caleb, was giving her something nobody else had ever given, the space to breathe, to think, and to choose. As the afternoon waned, they sat atop a low hill overlooking the prairie. Eleanor watched the wind ripple through the grass, felt the sun warm her shoulders, and let out a soft laugh, the kind that comes from pure, unburdened happiness. "You've never laughed like that in months," Caleb said, studying her face. "It suits you." She began, then stopped. The words caught in her throat. For so long she had been silenced, treated as fragile or worthless. But here, with him, she could speak or stay quiet. The choice was hers. For the first time, Eleanor realized that freedom wasn't just about escaping Silas Crowley or her father's control. It was about discovering herself in a place where she could make decisions, feel joy, and breathe without fear. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Eleanor felt a stirring deep within her chest, a sense that this small cabin, this gentle stranger, could become something more than refuge, something she could call home, and for the first time in her life, she dared to hope. Even the most peaceful days have a way of ending abruptly in the West. Eleanor and Caleb had spent the morning repairing a broken fence and the afternoon riding the prairie. They returned to the cabin just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, setting the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and crimson. The golden light made the landscape almost magical. But it couldn't hide the shadows creeping across Eleanor's heart. "They'll find me eventually," she said quietly, her voice barely louder than the whispering wind. She gazed at the distant tree line, imagining Silas Crowley and his men crossing the prairie to drag her back to a life she'd already rejected. Fear tightened her chest. "They won't stop until I'm theirs again." Caleb studied her, his storm blue eyes serious. "Then we need to be ready. You're safe here for now, but I won't let anyone take you back. Not him. Not anyone." Her gaze lifted to his, and she saw the steadfast determination in his eyes. He wasn't offering empty words or promises he couldn't keep. This man, this stranger who had shown her nothing but patience and care, was willing to risk everything for her. Night fell, and with it came a whisper of danger carried by the wind. The faint sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, made Eleanor's heart seize. She stiffened. Caleb noticed immediately. "They're out there," he said, voice low. "You ready?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, I don't know what to do." Caleb reached for her hand, steadying her trembling fingers in his. "Then do this," he said softly. "Stand beside me." Together they waited as the shadow of men appeared on the horizon. Silas Crowley and two of his hired thugs rode into the clearing, their horses kicking up dust. Crowley's pale face twisted in anger as he spotted Eleanor. "There she is!" he barked, spurring his horse forward. Caleb stepped in front of her, planting his feet firmly on the prairie soil. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said. His voice carried across the clearing calm, unwavering, and full of authority. "You leave her alone, or you'll answer to me." Crowley sneered, but something in Caleb's stance, in the quiet strength of a man willing to fight for what was right, gave him pause. The horses stamped impatiently, and the tension stretched between them like a taut wire. "You don't understand," Crowley spat. "She belongs to me." "No, she don't," Caleb replied firmly. "She belongs to herself, and she chose to be here." The words struck Eleanor like a wave. She realized that for the first time, she had a man on her side who didn't just protect her body but respected her mind, her heart, her freedom. Crowley's eyes narrowed, but he backed off, sensing the hopelessness of his cause. With a frustrated snarl, he turned his horse and rode away. Eleanor exhaled shakily, relief flooding her. Caleb lowered his hand from hers, but his gaze didn't leave hers. In that quiet moment, she felt the weight of everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the years of being silenced begin to lift. She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to thank you. You risked yourself. For me." Caleb's cheeks flushed, a rare, boyish pink appearing on his tanned face. He scratched the back of his neck, shifting uncomfortably. Then, with a courage that startled even himself, he spoke softly. "Eleanor, I know I'm just a ranch hand, not a man of wealth or power like your father or that Crowley. But I want to give you everything you deserve. I know I can't replace what you've lost. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be the one you can count on, the one who protects you, the one who stands with you, and I want to be the father of the family you've always dreamed of, if you'll allow it." The words fell into the night like a confession, vulnerable and sincere. Eleanor's breath caught. This wasn't a proposal of convenience or obligation. This was a declaration born of honesty, care, and the quiet courage of a man who had seen her pain and chosen to stand beside her anyway. Tears filled her eyes as she reached for him, grasping his hand tightly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Caleb, I choose you." A slow, astonished smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that transforms a man. He pulled her close, steadying her against the whirlwind of emotions she had carried for so long. In that embrace, they didn't need words, just the knowledge that finally, they had found each other in a world that had been cruel and unforgiving. For the first time, Eleanor understood that freedom and love could coexist. And for Caleb, the boy who had always worked quietly on the prairie, this moment marked the beginning of a life he never imagined he could have, but now would never let go. The prairie stretched wide and endless under the early morning sky, a canvas of gold and green bathed in soft sunlight. Eleanor sat on the edge of the cabin porch, her hands clasped in her lap, her mind spinning. The events of the previous night, Silas Crowley's retreat, Caleb's heartfelt declaration had left her trembling, her heart fuller and heavier than ever before. She had run from a life that suffocated her, and now, standing at the threshold of something entirely new, she felt both terrified and alive. Caleb approached quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, the steam rising in curling tendrils into the cool morning air. He didn't speak immediately, just offered her the second mug with a small, uncertain smile. His storm-blue eyes met hers, searching for any sign of hesitation. "You okay?" he asked softly. Eleanor nodded, her gaze dropping to the mug in her hands. I think I am," she admitted. The words felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. She had spent so long obeying orders, hiding fear and sorrow behind a mask, that admitting something as simple as "I'm okay" felt revolutionary. Caleb settled beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. You don't have to answer me, he said, but last night. What I said, did it scare you? Eleanor looked at him, seeing his nervous blush in the morning light. No, she whispered. It made me feel safe. For the first time in my life, someone isn't trying to control me. Someone is letting me decide for myself. He swallowed, clearly relieved. That's all I wanted. You choosing, it means everything to me. Her heart ached at his words. All the fear, the bruises, the whispered threats of her past life, they all fell away in that moment. She realized she didn't have to live under someone else's shadow anymore. She could choose who she wanted beside her, who she wanted to trust, who she wanted to love. I choose you, Caleb, she said softly. Not because I owe you, not because you saved me, but because you let me be myself. You gave me a choice. Caleb's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with a boyish joy that made Eleanor's chest ache. You mean that? He asked. I do, she replied. I choose you, and not just for today or tomorrow. For my life. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the grass around them, the distant cry of a hawk echoing across the prairie. And in that silence, Eleanor felt a new kind of strength rising inside her, a sense of agency, of freedom, and of love given freely rather than demanded. Caleb reached slowly, hesitating for just a heartbeat before taking her hand in his. His fingers were warm, calloused, yet gentle, and Eleanor felt an unspoken promise pass between them. They were partners now, equals, bound by choice rather than circumstance. Then we start from here, Caleb murmured. No one can tell us who to be. No one can tell us how to live. From this moment, we make our own rules, together. Eleanor's lips curved into a tentative smile, one that grew more confident with each heartbeat. She had never imagined that safety and love could coexist so completely. With Caleb, she felt seen, respected, and most importantly free, but the world beyond the cabin still loomed. The memory of Silas Crowley's threats and her father's cold ambitions lingered like shadows on the horizon. Eleanor knew she couldn't ignore them forever. Yet with Caleb by her side, standing not as her savior but as her equal, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As they walked toward the stable together, Eleanor felt the wind lift her hair, and the warmth of the sun settled across her shoulders. Every step she took beside Caleb was a step she owned herself, and with each step, she realized something she had never allowed herself to believe before. She deserved happiness, and she could have it. Caleb glanced at her, his storm-blue eyes soft with affection. You ready? He asked. For what? She teased lightly, a hint of laughter breaking through her lingering tension. For everything, he replied, smiling now, unguarded and full of hope. For our life. For the future. For all of it. Eleanor squeezed his hand and nodded, a small but resolute gesture. Then let's begin. And for the first time, she truly believed that the man who had let her choose was the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Not because of his strength, or his protection, or even his kindness alone, but because he had shown her that love could be gentle, patient, and free. The prairie morning was crisp, the kind that made the air taste sharp and clean. Eleanor and Caleb had spent the past week settling into a rhythm, tending the horses, repairing fences, and exploring the wide open land surrounding the cabin. But freedom, Eleanor knew, had its limits. Rumors of Silas Crowley's men searching the countryside had reached their ears, and the looming threat of her past life hung over them like a dark cloud. She stood at the edge of the cabin porch, scanning the horizon. Every shadowed hill and distant ridge held the possibility of danger. Caleb approached from the stable, carrying a rifle over his shoulder. His expression was calm, but Eleanor could see the tension beneath the surface. They're close, he said quietly. I can feel it. Crowley won't give up so easy. Eleanor nodded, her heart tightening. I know, but I won't run anymore. Not with you here? Caleb studied her, his storm blue eyes softening. You're sure about that? Yes, she said firmly. I've chosen. I choose you. And I choose this life even if it means standing up to him. A low whistle rose from the ridge above the cabin. Eleanor's pulse jumped. Caleb moved first, slipping behind her and drawing the rifle with practiced ease. 3 men emerged from the tree-lined Silas Crowley at their head, his pale face twisted with anger and disbelief. Eleanor! Crowley shouted. You'll come with me. You belong to me. Caleb stepped forward, planting himself between her and the men. She belongs to herself, he said firmly, and she's not going anywhere with you. Crowley sneered. Your arrogance will get you hurt, boy. Step aside. Caleb didn't move. He leveled the rifle, steady and unflinching. I said no. You leave now or you'll answer to me. Eleanor felt a surge of pride and relief. For the first time, she wasn't the helpless daughter or the frightened fiancée. She was a woman who had chosen her own path, standing beside the man who respected her enough to let her do so. Crowley's men hesitated. The tension stretched across the prairie like a taut wire, each heartbeat loud and sharp. Finally, Crowley's anger overcame him. He spurred his horse forward, but Caleb met his charge without fear, positioning himself so Crowley had no path to Eleanor. The horses pawed the ground, dust rising in swirling clouds. You'll regret this. Crowley shouted, his voice filled with venom. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. I will never go with you. I am not property. I am not yours. And I will not let you take my choice from me. The defiance in her voice surprised even her. Caleb gave a small nod of approval, and Crowley, realizing he was outmatched by both the land and the man, and perhaps the woman's courage, glared one last time before spinning his horse and retreating, his men following. Dust and tension lingered in the air long after they disappeared over the ridge. Caleb lowered his rifle, turning to Eleanor. Are you hurt? No, she said, breathless but resolute. Thanks to you. He offered her his hand, and she took it without hesitation. They walked back toward the cabin together, side by side, no longer hunter and hunted, but equals facing the world as partners. Inside, Eleanor sat by the fire, letting her hands rest in her lap. She looked at Caleb, and a smile tugged at her lips, a smile born of triumph, freedom, and love. You didn't just save me, she said softly. You let me choose my life. That means more than I can say. Caleb's cheeks flushed slightly, a familiar blush she had come to adore. I promised I'd stand by you, he said simply. I didn't know it would come to this, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Eleanor leaned into him, letting the warmth of his body soothe the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins. I'm so glad I ran that night, she whispered. Because if I hadn't, I'd never have found you. He smiled down at her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. And I'd never have had the chance to show you how much you mean to me. The moment stretched between them, quiet and intimate. Outside, the prairie remained vast and untamed. But inside the cabin, Eleanor felt something equally boundless. A love born not of necessity or obligation, but of choice and mutual respect. For the first time in her life, she knew she was truly free, not just from Silas Crowley, not just from her father's expectations, but free to live, to love, and to dream with the man who had given her that gift. And Caleb, the boy who had blushed at her words and stood unwavering in her defense, realized that protecting her was no longer just about duty, it was about love. Deep, enduring, chosen love. The sun rose slowly over the prairie, painting the horizon in soft shades of gold and pink. Eleanor stood on the porch of Caleb's cabin, the morning breeze lifting her hair as she took a deep, contented breath. For the first time in months, perhaps for the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. The fear that had haunted her since childhood, the pressure of her father's expectations, the shadow of Silas Crowley, all of it had faded into the past. Caleb stepped beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, the aroma rich and comforting. When he handed her one, their fingers brushed and a warm smile spread across her face. She realized how small moments like this, quiet, ordinary, shared, had become the most precious things in her life. "Morning," Caleb said softly, storm-blue eyes reflecting the sun's glow. "Morning," she replied, her voice light, confident, unafraid. For weeks, they had settled into a routine, tending the horses, repairing fences, exploring the vast open land that now felt like home. Each day, Eleanor felt more herself, more capable, more alive. And with Caleb by her side, she understood what it truly meant to be loved not as a possession, not as a responsibility, but as a partner, an equal. Someone worth choosing every single day. "You know," Caleb began, watching a foal stumble and rise unsteadily in the pasture, "we've built something good here. This place, it's more than just a cabin and some land. It's a start, a life we can shape together." Eleanor leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "It feels like freedom," she whispered, "like I finally found where I belong." "And you do," Caleb replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Here, with me. You've chosen this life, and I've chosen it too. Chosen you." The words sent a thrill through her chest. She smiled, remembering the night he had first blushed at her request for gentleness, and the moment he had offered to be the father of the family she might one day dream of. In that instant, she had known without doubt that he was the man she could trust, the man she could love without fear. Later that afternoon, they walked across the prairie together, the sun high and warm on their backs. Eleanor laughed as Caleb demonstrated how to ride one of the younger horses, clumsily keeping balance while she watched and offered encouragement. There was no need for caution, no need for pretense, just the open sky above, the grass beneath their boots, and the feeling of belonging in each other's company. As evening approached, the horizon lit with streaks of orange and violet, they returned to the cabin. Caleb stoked the fire while Eleanor prepared a simple dinner. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling flames casting flickering shadows across their faces. In those quiet moments, Eleanor realized how far she had come from a frightened girl fleeing an arranged marriage to a woman who had chosen her own path, her own partner, and her own life. After the meal, Caleb stepped outside, pulling Eleanor close. "I promise you," he said, voice low and steady, "we'll protect this life. We'll build a home filled with kindness, respect, and love. No one can take that from us." Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll stand with you through everything." That night, under a sky awash with stars, they sat on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, gazing out over the endless prairie. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth, and in the quiet, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had risked everything to escape a life that wasn't hers, and in doing so, had found something far greater than she ever imagined, a love that was gentle, steadfast, and freely chosen. In the weeks and months that followed, the cabin became a home. Neighbors whispered of the ranch hand and the runaway who had built a life together, but Eleanor and Caleb paid no mind. Their happiness wasn't for show, it was theirs alone. Every sunrise, every shared meal, every quiet evening by the fire was a testament to the power of choice, the courage to stand for oneself, and the enduring strength of love built on respect. Eleanor looked at Caleb, smiling softly. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of warmth, "for letting me choose, for letting me live." Caleb kissed her forehead, storm-blue eyes glinting with affection. "No," he whispered. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart." And as the stars glittered above and the prairie stretched endlessly before them, Eleanor knew, with a certainty she had never known before, that they had found not only safety in love, but a home built on freedom, choice, and a bond that would endure for a lifetime. The world was vast, wild and unpredictable, but together they were unstoppable. And for Eleanor and Caleb, that was all that mattered.